Hi, this is Magnus with another chess game for you. As I often say, I'm not a grandmaster, I'm just a regular guy sharing his games here on YouTube, hoping to learn something by reviewing them and maybe help a few other people along the way too. So this game today was another example of tactical pawn pushing in the opening, and I was quite pleased because I won it with my knights. So here's how it went. Knights, of course, very good in tight situations. My opponent began with queen's pawn lead, and I responded with my queen's pawn. He brought out a knight to attack my pawn, and I brought out a knight to defend. So this is all pretty standard stuff. He then made a pawn move, and I think this is understandable, denying these squares from my knight. I then continued to develop, and perhaps I was asking for this. He made another pawn move to kick my bishop away. So I decided to move my bishop to g6 rather than move it back where it come from along this diagonal, which would have been a more passive move, of course. But sitting here, we continue to keep an eye on this diagonal. And if he advances his pawns to try to kick me away, I can always advance this pawn one to give my bishop an escape square. So that's something I'm mentally noting. If I see any of these pawns being moved, his H pawn or his F pawn, then I'll make an escape square for my bishop. Okay, he makes another pawn move. I make a pawn move to complete my pawn chain and open this diagonal for my bishop. He makes another pawn move. I bring my bishop out. He makes another pawn move. I castle. And he brings a bishop out. Now I'm looking at his pawn structure and thinking, how can I do some damage? Or, what should the plan be going forward? And I'm looking at this square and thinking he's moved both of these pawns past this square. So this would be a great square for an outpost for my knight. But to get there, it's going to take me 3 moves. So the question is, is it worth spending 3 moves in the opening to get my knight there? So I decided to give it a go. Here's my first knight move. He moved a knight. Second knight move. He moved his knight again. Why he's moved his knight over here, I'm not so sure. And there's my third knight move, and he immediately took me with his bishop. So that's a bit of a lesson, I think, something for me to bear in mind in the future. 3 moves it cost me to get the knight there, to get it instantly removed from the board. Of course, I took him back. And I'm now thinking, well, at least this pawn's in a good position. And I'm just thinking about how can I get some support to it. When he made this pawn move, I'm very pleased with that because I can take this pawn and my pawn would be supported by my knight. So I took his pawn and he took me back with his knight. Now I suddenly see a tactic here. And I'm thinking about this bishop sacrifice. If I sacrifice my bishop there, getting a pawn in return, then I'll be able to take his knight with my knight. And then I've got a potential revealed attack on his queen when I move my knight forward. So I decide to go ahead, sack the bishop. He takes the bishop. I take his knight. Now he moves another pawn forward, and then I move my knight forward. It's a double attack on his queen. and he moves his queen away, not noticing the fork. Well, perhaps he did notice the fork. Perhaps he did notice it. But perhaps what he didn't notice was my bishop sitting here, protecting this square. So I played the check. Got his potentially got his rook here, and he took my knight. And of course, that was the end of the game. So there we go. I was quite pleased with the game because it was a tight situation again with the pawns cramping the space on the board, and knights are really, really good in tight situations if you can find a way to use them. Something to bear in mind is, that little mistake, bearing in mind how many moves it takes you to get a piece to a square, only to get it taken instantly. That's got to be a bad move. But anyway, it worked out okay in the end. Hope you enjoyed the game. See you next time.